I'm looking you right in the eye and saying that from now on, you are the only El Grande Americano.
Yeah.
Soy un hombre muy honrado que me gusta lo mejor. A mujeres no me falta ni el dinero ni el amor. En detalle en mi caballo por la sierra yo me voy. Las estrellas y la luna ellas me dicen dónde voy. Ay, 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 mi amor. Ay, mi morena de mi corazón. Me gusta tocar guitarra, me gusta cantar el sol. Mariachi me acompaña cuando canto mi canción. Me gusta tomar mis copas, aguardiente es lo mejor. También el tequila blanca con su sal le da sabor. Ay, 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 mi amor. Ay, mi morena de mi corazón.
There are some wrestlers who feel destined to become stars. The moment they walk through the curtain, you can see it. The crowd reacts, the company gets behind them, everything falls into place. Ludwig Kaiser, however, wasn't one of those wrestlers. In fact, for most of his WWE career, Kaiser felt like somebody who constantly stood beside the star rather than being the star himself. When fans talked about Imperium, they talked about Gunther. When they talked about championship matches, they talked about Gunther. When they talked about future world champions, they once again talked about Gunther. Meanwhile, Ludwig Kaiser was always somewhere in the background, not because he wasn't talented, lacked charisma, or couldn't talk. Far from it. But because professional wrestling can be the most cruel sport of all time. You can do everything right and still struggle to break through. And for years, that is exactly what happened to Ludwig Kaiser. What's fascinating is that his rise to stardom didn't happen because WWE had some elaborate master plan. It happened because everything went wrong. Imperium began falling apart. His singles run simply wasn't connecting. As a parody gimmick was about to die, a major injury changed everything, and somehow all those pieces combined to create one of the strangest success stories in modern wrestling today. Because finally today, Ludwig Kaiser isn't remembered as Gunther's sidekick. He is now remembered as the man who surpassed Gunther in popularity. He is remembered as El Grande Americano, a character that transformed him from struggling single star into one of the most beloved stars in Mexico. And the craziest part, none of it was supposed to happen. And I would like to thank you all for joining me once again here on the Heels Advocate channel. Be sure to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel with the bell turned on if you haven't already, and let us dive right into this original presentation. Before he became Ludwig Kaiser, before Imperium, before El Grande Americano, he was Marcel Barthel. Born in Hamburg, Germany, Barthel spent years building a reputation throughout Europe as one of the continent's most technically gifted wrestlers. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't a social media phenomenon, he wasn't somebody generating millions of views online. What he was, however, was incredibly respected by the people who watch European wrestling closely. Throughout the independent scene, Barthel developed a reputation for being fundamentally sound, great in the ring, professional, and dependable. The kind of wrestlers promoters love having around because they knew exactly what they were going to get every single night. That consistency helped him to become one of the most standout performers in Westside Extreme Wrestling. For many wrestling fans outside of Europe, they may not understand how important WXW was during that period. It was one of the premier wrestling promotions in Europe, a breeding ground for future stars, and Marcel became the promotion's most recognizable names. That success eventually caught WWE's attention. In 2017, WWE signed Barthel and brought him into NXT. At the time, many European wrestlers viewed the signing as a major opportunity. The thinking was simple. WWE was expanding internationally, and so NXT became the hottest developmental brand in wrestling. And Marcel finally had a chance to showcase his talents on a much bigger stage. The problem, however, WWE was loaded with talent. Everyone was trying to stand out, trying to get television time, try and fight for opportunities, and standing out became much harder than simply being a good in-ring wrestler. The early years of Marcel's WWE run were relatively quiet. He had matches, appearances, and flashes of potential, but there simply wasn't a real defining character. There wasn't a major storyline. There wasn't anything that truly separated him from the dozens of other talent trying to climb that WWE ladder. But that changed when Imperium was formed. And in many ways, Imperium saved his WWE career. That faction originally consisted of Walter, who then became Gunther, Fabian Eichner, Alexander Wolf, and Marcel himself. The concept was simple. Professional wrestling wasn't just sports entertainment. It wasn't just comedy. It wasn't just nonsense. To Imperium, wrestling was sacred, and that philosophy immediately made them feel different. While many WWE acts were built around a larger-than-life personality, Imperium felt like a cold-blooded, disciplined army. And for the first time since arriving in WWE, Marcel finally had something that truly fit him. His personality, presentation, and in-ring style suddenly made complete sense. Imperium became one of the most dominant forces in NXT UK. The group looked like stars, they carried themselves like stars, and more importantly, fans believed that they were stars. But even during the group's success, an interesting dynamic started to emerge. Because no matter how successful Imperium became, there was always one person standing above everybody else, Walter. And how could it not when Ludwig Kaiser was literally assigned the task of being Walter's own ring announcer?
Gunther!
This eventually would become both a blessing and a curse for Ludwig Kaiser. A blessing because being associated to Gunther elevated everybody around him, but a curse because the closer Gunther got to superstardom, the harder it became for everyone else in Imperium to escape his shadows. And unfortunately for Kaiser, that is exactly what happened. As Gunther continued ascending the WWE, becoming its most dominant champions of all time, Ludwig Kaiser slowly became known as the guy standing next to him. In Gunther's 2-year championship reign as IC champion, then his 2-time runs as World Heavyweight Champion, there was simply no room left for Ludwig Kaiser. So the best that Ludwig could become was the spokesperson, the lieutenant, the supporting character, a trusted ally. And over time, that perception became increasingly difficult to shake because the audiences respected Kaiser, but not enough to be necessarily invested in him as a single star, or not yet. And that is where the real struggles truly began.
Put it down! He's gonna, I'm afraid. Makuta!
One of the most difficult things for any wrestler is surviving after a faction loses momentum. When a group is hot, everybody benefits. But when a group cools off, weaknesses become exposed. And by 2024, Imperium wasn't the faction that it once was. The chemistry felt different. The energy felt off. The aura that once made them feel untouchable had started to fade away, and then came the cracks. Giovanni Vinci was removed from the group. Internal tensions became part of the story, and then suddenly, Imperium felt less like a dominant force and more like a faction approaching its expiration date. And so for Gunther, this wasn't necessarily a problem because he was the main guy. He can go and do his own stuff. He already became bigger than the group. He could survive on his own. In fact, he was actually thriving. But for Ludwig Kaiser, this really came with a lot of uncertainty. Because Imperium had become his identity, without it, what is exactly Ludwig Kaiser supposed to be? WWE clearly saw potential in him, but did they see enough to make him a single star? Did they see enough to give him more promo time, more opportunities to stand on his own? No. And whatever he did get, he delivered. His matches were good, his promos and presentation, they were good as well. So the problem wasn't execution, the problem was connection. Fans respected Ludwig Kaiser, but they were emotionally disconnected from Ludwig. Because of all the years of becoming a lackey, fans really couldn't take him serious as a single star, especially when he didn't feud or get over on Gunther. And that was ultimately the biggest difference between Gunther and Ludwig. Ludwig got respect, Gunther got investment. Respect, that gets you applauses. Investments, that gets you reactions. Respect gets you compliments online. Investment gets people buying tickets to come see you. And Kaiser only had one of the equation. The other, he didn't have it. And that is why his singles run felt stuck. Not terrible, not unsuccessful, just stuck. just like your typical WWE wrestler that we will all forget about in about 10 years and that will only become an answer to a trivia question of who was in the Imperium. At the exact same time Ludwig Kaiser was struggling to establish himself as a single star, another bizarre storyline was unfolding elsewhere in WWE, El Grande Americano. When Chad Gable first introduced the character, most fans assumed it was temporary, a comedy act, a parody, something designed to get a few laughs before quietly disappearing. Honestly, that wasn't unreasonable, because what else were we supposed to think? The presentation was ridiculous, the videos were ridiculous, the entire concept was made with AI, and yet the real comedic element to it all was how seriously Chad Gable was committed to the act. He embraced every single aspect of the character, and somehow, despite all expectations, fans stayed paying attention. In fact, they started playing along. Oh, that is not Chad Gable, that is El Grande Americano. It became one of the most over things in WWE, not because they believed it, but it was just simply that entertaining. But still, nobody expected El Grande Americano to become a major long-term success, least of all, Ludwig Kaiser. At that point, he wasn't connected to the gimmick at all. His career was heading into an entire different direction, and in my opinion, out of the WWE. Or at least, it seemed to be going that way anyways. Then everything changed, because wrestling careers can turn on a single moment, a single injury, a single decision, or simply put, a single opportunity. And that is exactly what happened to Ludwig Kaiser. When Chad Gable suffered an injury, WWE suddenly faced a decision: retire El Grande Americano or find somebody else to wear the mask. At first glance, Ludwig Kaiser seemed like an unusual choice. He was German, he had spent years portraying a serious European wrestler. Nothing about his character suggested lucha libre, let alone Mexico, so everything suggested that this, simply put, would not work at all. But suddenly, Ludwig Kaiser revealed that he could speak fluent Spanish.
La gente debe esperar.
And so suddenly this became very interesting, because for the first time in years, Ludwig Kaiser wasn't being asked to play Ludwig Kaiser. He was given a blank canvas, a chance to reinvent himself, become something completely different, and perhaps most importantly, get a chance to escape the shadow he had been living under for years. Many wrestlers would have treated the gimmick as a joke, a temporary assignment, a placeholder role. But Kaiser, he simply didn't, and he committed 100%. And that commitment changed everything. The smartest thing Ludwig Kaiser did was understanding that he simply couldn't imitate Chad Gable. That version of El Grande Americano already existed. Trying to copy it would only guarantee a failure. Instead, Kaiser evolved the character. He made it his own. The presentation was different, the attitude was different, the energy was different. Suddenly, El Grande Americano wasn't a parody. He felt like an actual wrestling character, a larger-than-life personality who could exist beyond the joke, and fans noticed this. The reaction started going, crowds became louder, interest became stronger. For the first time in years, people weren't talking about Ludwig Kaiser because of Gunther. They were talking about Ludwig Kaiser because of Ludwig Kaiser. And that distinction truly mattered, because this wasn't borrowed momentum anymore. This was his. And for the first time, fans started connecting with the character, and the rise simply became impossible to ignore. Around the same time, WWE's relationship with Mexico became increasingly important. The company was expanding its reach, building stronger connections with Mexican wrestling, exploring new opportunities. And then suddenly, El Grande Americano found himself in the perfect position. As WWE acquired AAA, now they had a new home south of the border. And over there, the character resonated, the crowds responded. The gimmick connected in ways nobody expected. What began as a replacement role evolved into something much bigger, and perhaps the most fascinating part of the entire story is that none of it felt manufactured. Fans chose to embrace the character, to invest in the character, and fans chose to make El Grande Americano matter the most. And thus, the audience created the phenomenon we all know and love today. Once that happened, everything forever changed. because now Ludwig Kaiser wasn't just fighting for relevance anymore, he had already found it. Looking back, it's easy to focus on the successes, the reactions, the popularity, the rise of El Grande Americano, and everything that followed. But what makes the story really special is that something happened before it. Years were spent in somebody else's shadow. Years were spent helping another wrestler become a superstar. Years were spent searching for an identity that fans could connect with, yet failing. Most wrestlers never got a second chance to reinvent themselves. Most wrestlers never find the role that finally unlocks their potential. Ludwig Kaiser did, and that is why wrestling is so unique. Because in what world would a German who randomly happens to speak Spanish land a role that parodies an American becoming a lucha libre wrestler that wasn't originally his but landed in his lap because somebody got injured? This only happens in the world of professional wrestling. Today, Ludwig Kaiser is no longer viewed as Gunther's sidekick. He's no longer viewed as simply a supporting character or a guy standing in the background. Now he is the attraction. Now he is the story. He is the reason people are paying attention. And that is why his story is so fascinating. Because it proves somehow wrestling has shown us time and time again that talent matters, hard work matters, opportunities matter. But sometimes the bigger factor of it all is being the right wrestler. For years, Ludwig Kaiser had the talent but not the opportunity. Then one unexpected opportunity changed everything. And in this process, the fall of Ludwig Kaiser created the rise of El Grande Americano. The most fascinating part of Ludwig Kaiser's rise isn't that El Grande Americano got over. Strange wrestling characters get over all the time. Look at Danhauser. What makes this story unique, however, is where it got over. Mexico should have been the last place this gimmick worked. When Chad Gable first introduced El Grande Americano, it was essentially a parody character. It was over the top, exaggerated, and clearly designed to get a laugh. Nobody looked at that original version and thought it would eventually become one of the most beloved acts in Mexican wrestling. Yet, that is exactly what happened. And the reason is because Ludwig Kaiser understood something many wrestlers do not. Commitment matters. Once Kaiser inherited the role, he stopped treating it like El Grande Americano was a punchline. He started treating him like a star. He started improving his Spanish, and that became a huge part of his success. His presentation changed, the confidence changed, and even the way he carried himself felt different. This wasn't somebody making fun of Lucha Libre anymore. This became somebody who embraced it, who respected it, trying to earn the audience rather than mocking them. And that is why Chad Gable in Mexico was a heel, yet in America a babyface. And that is why Ludwig Americano is a heel in America and a babyface in Mexico. And little by little, all of the wrestling fans responded. And now looking back at it, WWE's acquisition of AAA might have been the reason why Ludwig Kaiser was able to get Americano over this much. Because the timing couldn't have been better. At the exact moment Kaiser was reinventing himself, WWE suddenly had a direct connection to one of the most important wrestling markets in the world. Instead of being confined to Monday Night Raw, El Grande Americano now had an entirely new audience available to him. An audience that didn't know him as Gunther's lackey. Over there, he was fresh, he was new, nobody really knew him. So he got a rare opportunity to make a new, fresh second impression. And this impression was different than Chad Gable over there in America. Because what Mexico got to see week after week, appearance after appearance, match after match, was commitment. And that commitment created a connection that grew stronger and stronger. And then, something that nobody saw coming, fans finally accepted him. They didn't just accept him, they embraced him. And by the end of 2025, El Grande Americano became one of the hottest acts in Mexico. And suddenly, a wrestler who spent years trying to escape somebody else's shadow had become the center of attention. Not because WWE forced it, not because he won a championship, not because he received a massive push, but because audiences chose him. Those are often the strongest stars in professional wrestling, the ones who fans discover for themselves. As the popularity of El Grande Americano continued to grow, the act itself became bigger. It wasn't just Kaiser anymore. Eventually, Rayo Americano and Bravo Americano joined the movement. Los Americanos were born, and somehow a gimmick that originally felt like it would disappear after a few months had evolved into something that became a full-blown faction. The crazy part is that every step of this journey sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud. A German wrestler takes over a parody lucha libre gimmick, the gimmick becomes serious, the character becomes beloved in Mexico, a faction forms around the character, the audiences treat him like a hero. If somebody had pitched that story a year earlier, most wrestling fans would have laughed. It simply sounded too unrealistic. Yet somehow, reality turned out stranger than fiction. What Los Americanos provided was something Kaiser had never truly possessed before: leadership. For years, Ludwig Kaiser had become the one following somebody else, following Gunther, supporting Gunther, protecting Gunther. Now he had people of his own following him, and that shift might seem small, but the subconscious impression it leaves behind you is massive. For the first time in his WWE career, Kaiser wasn't secondary. He wasn't the supporting character, he became the attraction. And that confidence became visible every time he appeared on screen. It felt like a wrestler finally realizing his own potential, not because everybody handed it to him, because he had earned it. Then reality once again entered the story. In May 2026, Ludwig Kaiser found himself at the center of controversy. Reports emerged regarding a battery arrest in Florida following an altercation involved another resident in his apartment complex. Almost immediately, questions started appearing. Would WWE distance themselves from him? Would AAA keep pushing him? Would he be able to travel? Would the planned masked versus masked match happen? Nobody really knew. Whenever real-life controversies enter wrestling storylines, things become unpredictable. Sometimes careers recover, and sometimes they do not. Sometimes public perception changes overnight, and for a moment, it felt like El Grande Americano's story might have been officially derailed. Then something unexpected happened. The opposite occurred. Instead of turning on Kaiser, many fans in Mexico rallied around him. Rumors started circulating online regarding what may have led to the altercation. People debated the details, they debated the reports, but regardless of where people stood, one thing became clear. The audience's connection to Kaiser wasn't weakening, it was growing. And what happened next may have been the most important moment of his entire career. After the controversy, there was legitimate concerns about his upcoming appearances. Some events were altered, some appearances were questioned. Nobody knew exactly what would happen next. Then Kaiser appeared in Mexico City. The reaction was simply unbelievable. Fans were singing, chanting, and celebrating, and perhaps most importantly, Kaiser genuinely looked emotional. You could see it on his face. This wasn't a normal crowd. This wasn't somebody getting a temporary push. This was a wrestler realizing just how much he meant to an audience. And honestly, I think that moment is where the entire story changed. Because up until that point, El Grande Americano wasn't a successful character. After that moment, he became something bigger. He became a symbol, a hero, a cultural phenomenon. That's not something wrestling companies can manufacture. You can't force people to feel that way. That audience felt it and they showed it. And by this point, Mexico had fully been embracing Ludwig Kaiser from the beginning. The irony was incredible. For years, Kaiser struggled to get audiences invested in him. Then he puts on a mask and accidentally became one of the most beloved wrestlers in the entire country. That is wrestling for you guys. Sometimes nothing makes sense. Every great storyline eventually reaches a payoff. For El Grande Americano, that payoff came in one of the most anticipated matches in recent memory. Grande Americano versus Grande Americano. Kaiser versus Chad Gable. Mask versus Mask. The original versus the successor. What made this match special wasn't just a stipulation. It was everything that led to it. Years of frustration, years of reinvention, years of unexpected twists. The audience wasn't simply watching two wrestlers fight, they were watching the accumulation of an entire character arc. One version of El Grande Americano represented where the gimmick started. The other represented what it had become. And when the dust finally settled, Ludwig Kaiser emerged as the clear winner of the story. Not because he won the match, but because he had transformed his entire career. When people will look back at Ludwig Kaiser's career years from now, I don't think they'll remember the losses. I don't think they will remember the years that he spent behind Gunther or how close he became to becoming another talented guy that was lost in the shuffle. They're going to remember Grande Americano. They're going to remember the impossible rise. They're going to remember the crowds in Mexico. They're going to remember a wrestler taking a gimmick that looked completely doomed and turned it into something truly special. And that is what makes this story so fascinating. WWE didn't plan this. AAA didn't plan this. The fans didn't plan this. Yet it happened because of a series of unexpected events, forcing Ludwig Kaiser to reinvent himself. Imperium started fading. His singles run wasn't connecting. Chad Gable got injured, a mask became available, a new opportunity appeared, and Ludwig Kaiser did what great wrestlers have always done. He adapted and he evolved. He found something nobody else could see. And sometimes in professional wrestling, the greatest stars are built completely by accident. Ludwig Kaiser is proof that accidents can create legends.